Put the whoosy on the whatsy. Attach the whatsy to the whoosy. Connect the thingamajig to the thingamabob, and that'll make the whatchamacallit.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Making Records with Eric Valentine. So we had an eventful week last week. We got to check out some Queens of the Stone Age stuff, and then it got taken down. So sorry about that. Ultimately, I don't really have control over that, and some folks are not super into having their behind the scenes stuff floating around on YouTube. So I will respect that, and it is down. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe there's another way for me to share that stuff where I have more control over it. But for now, unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be available. It was available for download, so I know some folks were able to download it. I don't think it makes any sense for anybody else to upload it to YouTube because it'll just get taken down again. So I probably know. I'm not going to encourage anybody to do that. But who knows? Maybe you guys can trade it with each other as contraband at this point. So there you go. We'll see what happens with that. I'm not really sure how that's going to play out. So this is going to be the answers for the W.T.F. round one, and I guess in reality it's going to be as many answers as I can do here. I'm going to do as many as I can. Wow, thank you so much for all the incredible, thoughtful questions. I've mentioned this before, but I think it's just really cool to have folks, inquire about the information that's important to them, because I'm just sort of talking about whatever is interesting to me, and sometimes, I'll gloss over things that I think are more useful and important to everybody else. So, and I'm happy to share whatever. So thank you for all the incredible questions, and I got a bunch of them sort of queued up here that I'm going to go through, and we'll just see how far I get. There's over 300 on there now, and so that I don't, I'm not going to be able to get to all of them. I'm thinking what I'm going to do is I'll just do these response episodes occasionally, and I'll just keep cranking these out because I want to actually try and answer all of them. And so I'm going to go chronological. I did categorize these because some folks there is a little bit of repetition in the questions that are being answered, so I can sort of group them together and answer a few at a time if it's essentially the same question. And we'll see how far I get, and then there'll be another installment where I'll just pick up where I left off, and I'll do another chunk of them. But if people are going to take the time to think of a question and throw it at me, I'm gonna try and answer them all. So we'll see how this works, this will keep us busy on the questions for a while before I have to put up another one to ask for more. So I think we'll just dive in. I'm in New York right now in a hotel room again, so I'm just trying to make it work wherever we're at. The family's out on the road. Mom's doing shows and radio promo for the new record, so here we are in New York, and I got my laptop and my cell phone, and I can answer questions. So I thought this was kind of a good way to start. There was a question asked here by Lee or Lai Likes Music. The question is, why did you decide to create a YouTube channel? I thought that's a great place to start. I'm not exactly sure. I've always been pretty bad at doing things that aren't fun for me. So I'm enjoying this. It's been really, really fun for me to do. And as long as it stays fun and brings joy to my life, I will continue to do it. I think there's a couple things about it. I think definitely meeting Grace and us getting together in our lives has definitely had a huge effect on me and my personality. All of my close friends and my family had all recognized it, almost immediately. It's like, wow, you've really changed. And I think, everybody has felt in a very positive way. I've just become a lot more open and outgoing than I was in the past, and I don't think I would have ever done this had I not met Grace and got together with her. She also she gets the credit for finding the incredible opening and closing theme music. That alone was reason enough to do this, just to be able to hear that hilariously awesome song every time. And you know, I'm in a place now where I'm a new dad and I have a family, and the plan was, you know, if we're going to have a family, the family stays together. And so she is, you know, still, you know, in sort of the prime of her career as a performing artist, and so as a touring musician. And so we agreed, you know, if we're going to have a family, the family stays together. So when mom goes on tour, we all go on tour. And so that makes it very difficult for me to produce records when I'm on a tour bus. And so it's going to limit, you know, my options for being able to be involved in recording projects for a little bit. And I just love it. I love being engaged in it and thinking about it and talking about it. And so I think this created an opportunity for me to just still be engaged in it, at least intellectually, thinking about it and talking about it. The other thing that happened is this was a good time for me to start archiving all of the stuff that I worked on. I talked about that a little bit in the session documentation and organization episode. And so that process is a massive undertaking. The hard drives were the easy part. I have to archive all of the analog masters. I'm going to start doing that when we get back into LA here pretty soon. And so when I started going through that and just looking at everything that had been done over the last almost 30 years of making records, it was a very reflective process for me. And I thought, you know, having a YouTube channel and, you know, sharing some of these experiences with people as I'm going through this process of archiving and reflecting on all of the stuff that had been done, that I worked on, had been created, whatever had happened over the years, this would be a good time to do it. You know, I don't know when this may come around again, and I've done it, you know, with other folks and other people's shows, you know, that are really wonderful. Warren's great; he's got an amazing YouTube channel, and I've done it with Dave Pintato and stuff. And I thought it would just be easier for me to just do it, you know, on my own schedule, my own way. I could just sort of, you know, keep pumping this stuff out there on a more regular basis. So there you go. Those were the best reasons I could come up with for doing it. And you know, we'll see where it goes. All right, let's see what we got next here. So then, and I'm just going to apologize straight away here if I mess up people's names. I'll do the best I can, but I may really butcher some of the pronunciations here. Okay, so Jonas Dalabi, I think. I've only recently got into producing, mixing, and recording music. Although there are many videos on how to record and mix, etc., the hardest part for me is actually the workflow of the recording. Can you perhaps elaborate a bit more on the recording process? How do you create an environment in which the artists feel comfortable and play their best and give a nice, dynamic, and emotional performance? For instance, do you let the guitarist or bass player play along when tracking drums? Thank you. It's a great question. You know, there are a lot of ways to approach this, and for me, a lot of it is based on the specific artist. You know, the way I would approach recording a band like Nickel Creek would be very different than the way I would approach working on a song for the Jonas Brothers. So I'm going to talk in some generalities here, the things that I think are really, really essential for workflow. You know, first of all, I think establishing a rapport with the band is really, really essential, and this is sort of part of the question. You know, create an environment where the artist feels comfortable to play. That is so incredibly important, and I think the number one thing for that is being able to garner or establish trust and confidence from the artist in you, in yourself being the producer on the project, because they're inviting you into their creative world to help make very, very important decisions about how their music is going to come across, what their music's going to sound like, and they really have to trust you to invite you in to do that. If you lose that trust, the project will fall apart. I guarantee it. It's happened to me. And so, for me, at the very beginning of the project, before I even start pre-production, anything in the whole process, I like to try and set aside time to just meet and get to know the band first. Just find a time. Just go and hang out, have dinner, or go to wherever they hang out, do whatever they do. Just get into their world and listen to music, talk about music, find out what their favorite records, their favorite songs, favorite artists, what music they hate. That's really important to know. You don't want to be in there going like, oh, we should do something like Def Leppard on this song. And then they're like, I hate Def Leppard. What are you talking about? That's a great way to lose somebody's trust and confidence. So learn that stuff before you really get into it. If you're really going to be producing a whole record with somebody, really important to know what their loves and hates are, because you're going to be a part of all of those forks in the road where it's like, I need to know what an amazing version of this band's music is, or what a shitty version of this band's music is, and to make those choices intelligently, you got to really know them. So then, typically, the way it goes is there is some sort of pre-preparation. This can get sort of fudged a little bit depending on the artist, but I like to show up prepared. In the past, it was called pre-production, and that's the part of the process where you get together with the band and start figuring out what they're going to play. Well, actually, I'm sorry, I'm going a little bit out of order, because before that, you have to figure out what songs you're going to record. I talked about this a little bit in the documentation episode, and I showed the sheet that I use for going through all the songs that get given to me. Sometimes I'm handed 20, 30, 40 songs to sift through and decide what songs we're going to go after. It's ultimately a decision that's made with the band, but they want my input. I take that very seriously. I listen to everything very carefully and have very thoughtful responses about all the songs that they've sent me. So once you actually have a collection of songs that you're going to record, then you go in to pre-production and start figuring out just a basic approach for those songs, and make sure that if this is an actual rock band, everybody knows what they're going to play on this song, or at least has some idea of what they're going to play, roughly what the tempo is, what a good key is for the singer to sing the song in, what the guitar parts are. That's where I do a lot of guitar arranging, is in pre-production. It's like making sure that they don't have parts that are colliding with each other, or if they are, just doubling each other, that they're actually really playing the parts the same, the way they're strumming it, the way they're fretting it. All of that stuff becomes really important to get a nice solid double. So all of that stuff can get figured out. Drum pattern, how the kick drum relates to the bass guitar, all that stuff gets figured out in pre-production. So when you go in to actually record, if you're like renting time in a recording studio, you're not sitting there going like, oh man, wow, what should this drum part be? Like, that is the wrong time to be asking those questions. Sometimes, occasionally, you'll find in the moment that maybe this isn't working as good as we thought it would, and you can make changes on the fly. But I like to show up with a clear idea of what what everybody's going to be playing and what this is going to be like. I think that's another important part of the whole process is I probably wouldn't even step into a project if I didn't have my own mind's ear, what I think this should sound like. If I don't really have that vision together going into it, it's just, it's like there's nobody driving. And so I like to make sure I know for sure what this is going to be like. If this is going to be like big open ambient roomy drums, or super tight and dry like in the drum booth, or like that should be figured out in advance and probably discussed with the band. Like this is what I hear for this, so everybody's on the same page and you go for it, go for that direction. And so then I track basics. I always like to have as many people playing at the same time as possible. You just take a bigger bite in that first pass. At the same time, I'm always trying to assess what the band is really capable of pulling off. And it's irresponsible for a producer to put in a band in a situation that they won't succeed in, because it'll just fuck up the morale of the project. And so I'm trying to assess that. And so your takes in certain instances will only be as good as your worst player. If you have to have everybody play good in order to be keepable, the worst player determines whether a pass is keepable or not. There's some things that you can work around and punch afterward. If there's a guitar that's isolated, you could punch that afterward if there's a couple of flubs in there or whatever. But that's an assessment you'll have to make about what the band can really pull off. The more I can have playing at once, the better, because I get a more complete picture straight away, and it just sounds more finished when the band walks into the control room to hear it. And so there would be that round of tracking basics, and then I like to try and move quickly, and so I'll sometimes do some quick comps on the fly in the moment, just to for playbacks for the band, but I'll save all of the real editing for later, and just keep the momentum going for the band. And so and I'll probably cut maybe a couple songs a day like that, and then I'll either do some editing that night, let the band leave maybe 7, 8 o'clock, and I'll stay up a little later and do some editing, or come in real early, have the band come in around 11 or 12, and I'll come in early in the morning and do some editing in the morning. And so then once you get to tracking the basics, which is like drums, bass, guitars, whatever the foundational stuff is of the band, then I usually have the band take a break for a second, and I'll spend a few days just finalizing the comps of the basic tracking and getting good rough mixes of stuff. And this is super, super important, because if you start overdubbing to uncomped stuff, then you end up just having to do more edits later. Because if you change the comp and somebody played to different information, those new tracks will have to get adjusted to feel like they were played to what ends up being the final comp. So always comp first before you overdub to it. You're just creating more work for yourself. So I'll send the band away. They can chill for a few days, and I'll finish all the comps, get some good rough mixes. So anytime I pull up one of the songs, I can just hit play and it'll come out of the speakers and be exciting for everybody to hear. That's an important part of maintaining that trust and confidence with the band. And then you get into the overdub process. And there's a lot of ways to slice this. My general rule of thumb is that there's always this one guy in the band that cannot do their thing for 10 hours straight, and that's the singer. Singers cannot sing for 10 hours a day. It's impossible. And so what I usually like to do is to have every single day be overdubbing some stuff like extra guitars or keys or percussion or whatever extra doodads you want on your song during the day, and then towards the day do an hour or two of vocal tracking each day. So I'm spreading out the vocal tracking across the whole overdub process. If you save all the vocal overdubs for the end, your singer will fucking kill you, because it's impossible. It's really, really difficult to expect the singer, just sing for 10 hours every day on this whole record, it'll be great. Not possible. So do your singer a favor, break up his vocal overdub, his vocal tracking on the album, just an hour or two every day, and they'll survive it. You'll get great takes. And so then once you're done, once you get done with the overdub process, theoretically you have finished recordings and it's time to mix. If you're mixing, then Now, most of the stuff is being recorded in computers, and so a lot of people are sort of working on mixes as they go, and so it's usually just kind of finishing off mixes at that point. But that's really an overview of the whole thing. I hope that's what you were looking for. But in general, I would say most of the time that's how it goes for me. All right, here we go. Next question is from Connor. It says, Eric, I've been having an issue recently during longer sessions and wonder if you have a solution. I'm finding that after about 6 hours of work, bands will start to lose morale and get bored, and my ears will get fatigued. It can be hard to keep going at this point, and I feel like I'm not being as efficient with time as I could be. Lots of times we can barely get anything done over the last few hours of the session. How do you keep everyone excited and engaged during those long sessions, including yourself? Thanks. Good question there. The sort of session fatigue or ear fatigue, that can be a real problem. For some reason, other people have commented on it that I seem to have a unlimited endurance for a recording. I just enjoy it too much, and so I will go 15 hours in the studio without even noticing it. That's I don't think that's particularly normal, and so I unfortunately I don't know that I have a really great solution for you with that part of it. It's not something that I've personally really wrestled with. I know that my ears fatigue through the course of the day, and I've just learned over time how my ears hear things at the beginning of the day versus how they hear things at the end of the day, and it is two different things for sure. At the beginning of the day, things tend to strike me as being a little bit more harsh, and if I'm EQing at the beginning of the day, I'll start pulling out high mid-range and stuff to soften things, and by the end of the day, everything my ears have sort of like automatically sort of suppressed all of that, and everything sounds a lot more smooth to me, and so I'll be inclined to make things more aggressive towards the end of the day. But I'm aware of that now, so I know, like, okay, this is end of the day sound, so I'm not going to push too much high mid range. I'll regret it in the morning. But with the band part of it, like, that's one of the things that I've brought in there, that I try to bring to the session. If you're having trouble with a particular person, like you're overdubbing and you're trying to do all of the bass or something, you can certainly break it up with different stuff. If you're able to leave the bass recording set up, and also have a guitar recording setup going, you could do bass for first half of the day and guitar for the second half of the day, and then, like I just mentioned, then always do some vocals every day, so the vocalist doesn't get burned out. And I find that I'm setting the tone for the session every day. So the band will take cues off of my energy level and my basic spirit and state of mind, in the room. And if I'm feeling fatigued and dragged and, unmotivated, they will definitely, pick up on that energy and probably follow suit. And so I consider it part of my job if I'm going to ask the band, to work for 12 hours straight. I am definitely going to bring all of the energy and inspiration I possibly can for every one of those hours to try and help keep them energized and excited about recording. I have to bring that excitement first to just initiate that energy in the room. So if there's a way you can find that in yourself and always bring that to the band, I think it'll be contagious and they will catch on. All right. Moving on here. So then we've got Raphael Cohen asked, I was wondering about your studio personal life balance when you were younger, in your 20s. I'm 25. I find myself spending regularly 15 hours a day at the studio. Yeah, I just mentioned that. Enjoying every minute of it and constantly learning, whether I'm working with a client or just mixing by myself. I'm just afraid I'm overdoing this and neglecting other aspects of life. What do you think is the right balance and how to keep it mentally healthy? Thank you. So these questions are all kind of in in the same category. There's a bunch of these sort of work-life balance kind of things. So it sounds like Raphael and I are kind of similar in a certain way, where it doesn't feel like work at all. So it's not fatiguing. It's just endlessly kind of inspiring and engaging for me. I'm just so curious and excited about it that I really lose track of time. And so it's really hard to say what a good, work-life balance is. My general rule of thumb is that if this is bringing joy to my life, then this is the right thing to do, and it could be very, very different for somebody else. I'm not as worried about other people as I am myself. Like I mentioned before, I only do things because they bring joy to my life. That's it. I'm not really motivated by money. And, I've been very fortunate that the thing that I love to do the most has allowed me to be comfortable and, have a home and food and clothes and stuff. But, I would say, Raphael, if you are really enjoying being in the studio 15 hours a day, then I would say absolutely do it. The obvious risk is that you're missing out on life experiences along the way. I did essentially that. I mean, I started early. I started playing drums when I was 4 or 5 years old and was obsessed with that, and then got really interested in recording, was recording stuff at home. By the time I was 12 or 13 years old, and joined a band and built a studio in a garage by the time I was 16 or 17, and was just doing studio stuff all the time, every second I possibly could from the time I was around 16, 17 years old. And never felt like work to me. Don't regret a single second of it. But there is a thing about it, like, when you do only one thing, if you're only spending your time recording and thinking about recording and just having that consume your life, you become a very one-dimensional person for sure. And now looking back on it, I can see that I was kind of boring. Unless you were interested in recording, I didn't really have a whole lot to say about it. Anything else. I have other interests, but I just didn't have a lot of experience to offer with any of my other interests, and so that's one risk. It can be kind of boring, if somebody's not into recording and they're trying to have a conversation with you. You don't really have much else to talk about. And there's the possibility of missing out on other life experiences. Life can pass you by, I, at a certain point, like I mentioned, when I met Grace, it was a huge awakening for me. I just never been around somebody that invited me to be myself more than she does. And I've never felt so comfortable being so open. And so, it just, it inspired a lot of huge changes in my life. And but this is at the point, like I'm 50 years old. I'm twice as old as the gentleman asking this question. And I've made a lot of records. I've been super lucky and have had a lot of, fortunate opportunities to make records. And so at this point when, I realized, like, okay, I'm ready to make a change in my life. I've done the, like, I'm going to be in a cave 15 hours a day thing for 30 years, and I'm ready to get out of the cave and have some other experiences in my life. And I knew for sure having a baby that would absolutely change things for me as far as how I could balance my time. And it took me a second to really think about it. And I didn't make that decision, cavalierly, and just decided, like, what, I've made a whole lot more records than I have human beings, and so, how boring and predictable would it be if I just spent the next 30 years of my life doing exactly the same thing? And so it was an amazing time for me to just have a huge change and really have a different life experience for a period of time, or this may permanently change things for me. I don't know, and I'm loving every second of it. I'm I still love music. I still think about it all the time. I love this opportunity to be able to talk about it and share it with people. But man, it is incredible to have the experience of being a father, something that I absolutely could not have done responsibly the way I was balancing my life when I was producing, because it was extremely immersive for me. I mean, I would just vanish into the studio for 4 or 5 months and, just not come out. You cannot do that, or at least I would never choose to do that if I was a father, and so again, I'm very, very lucky. I have the luxury of being able to do this now in my life, and take all the time that I want to spend with my son, or take moments to do things like this. And so I would say everybody has to balance it in a way that works for themselves. I don't think there is one answer for everybody. I will say that the music business and the landscape of the recording industry is a very, very competitive place. And I think for me that there are very pivotal moments in my career where an opportunity was presented to me, a door got opened for me that I could walk through. And if I was more casually doing my thing and just spending a couple hours here and there or whatever, I don't know that I would have been able to walk through those doors and succeed if I wasn't doing it as obsessively and passionately as I was. It's a really, really competitive place. You're trying to generate results, create results that are competing with other people that may be that obsessive, that may be in there 15 hours a day obsessing over things. I've always sort of structured my creative process so I give myself as much freedom with time as possible. Time is the currency that I really work with when I'm being creative. I feel like I can fix or make anything the way I want it given enough time. And time has been the only limiting factor for me on anything that I've been involved with. There was one time when I was very young, I was in summer camp and took this martial arts class, and I asked the instructor as a very naive young kid, how many people could you fight at one time? And instead of answering with a number, he responded with a question, and he said, how much room do I have? I thought, wow, that's so cool, But it's the same thing for me, like I think there are no limits on what you can achieve and your creativity, given you have enough time to actually really execute it and explore all the possibilities. So the time is important. I think it really, really is. If you want to try and do something really extraordinary, occasionally, people are either super gifted or have those, lightning in a bottle moments where they, amazing stuff just happens to fall out of them on their first tries. But I wasn't one of those people. I had to really work at it. So, it took a lot of effort for me to try and get there sometimes, and I'm glad that I took the time to do it. I have no regrets about all the time that I spent in the studio. And I'm super grateful to be able to rebalance things differently now. So I hope that answered the question. So let's see what this next one is. I think this is along the same lines. Yeah. So this is you say you love being a dad. So here's a dad career question. I am a freelance musician, engineer, producer for just over 10 years. I'm about to become a father. My partner also works as a freelance musician. We have no family support. That makes it really tough. And our income is essentially about to be cut in half-ish because somebody's not going to be able to work. As we can't both work at the same time when the baby arrives, and being self-employed means I don't get any benefits like maternity leave, etc. Yeah, independent folks don't get that. Did you do anything career-wise at the time to handle having to start a family? It's looking like I'll have to stop engineering at a large studio. Last 10 years, not really, I guess, what I really want work-wise encountered when starting a family, and how do you How do you manage it following on from that? What was your first major label? Oh, yeah. What was? Here's an additional question in there. Okay, so I'll do a little more on the dad working life thing, just specifically about that. I will say that I've talked about this briefly, but Grace and I had a very, very detailed conversation. Like, how is this going to work if we're going to have a baby? There has to be at least a plan in place of like, how are we going to be able to have the time available to take care of our child, and be able to have people available to work, get income, resources available to pay for everybody's stuff. It's super important to map that out in advance. For us, there were different options of how we could have done it. If Grace wanted to take more time off, I could continue producing. That wasn't as desirable for us because, like I mentioned, I would just be gone, and I didn't really want that experience. I don't really, I wanted to be around, while my baby's growing up. And with Grace's career, we were able to do it where it's much more inclusive of the family, and that's what made the most sense for us. Is that while we're working on her record, our son can be around as much as he wants, and while she's on tour, he can totally come with us, and so the family stays together. We have that luxury. I certainly recognize that that's not not always available, probably mostly not available for a lot of folks. And so there's sometimes really tough decisions that need to be made and compromises that need to be made. But I think the best advice that I have for you is talk about it now before the baby shows up, because when the baby shows up, it is crazy. Like, it's hard to really anticipate what it's like, where it's like when that baby is awake, somebody has to be in the room with that baby all the time. So it's either you or your wife or grandparents or a nanny or a babysitter or somebody. Somebody has to be supervising that kid pretty much all the time, and it's like that for a while, and it's kind of hard to imagine that. I had some kind of naive misconceptions of like, oh, he'll just hang out in the room with me while I'm mixing stuff. It'll be great. He'll love it, And it's like, what happens? He's in there pushing every single button and ruining everything. I call him the destroyer. And that's the way that really goes. I don't know that, there's any other version of it when you have a baby in the room. As soon as they can, even by the time he could crawl, he was just like in everything. Like, there's no way you can focus on something while he's in the room. It's just like total destruction. So really wrap your brain around that. It's important. And figure out a plan in advance, because once you're in it, it's hard to figure that out on the fly, because everybody is sleep deprived. It can be very stressful at times, if your baby is uncomfortable or distressed and they're crying and everybody's trying to figure out what to do and freaking out and stuff, So you definitely want to have a plan together in advance, and things will go a lot smoother. Basically, my solution for having a baby with my work-life balance is I'm not going to produce records. That was my solution. There's no way I could do that now. And it's not only that, I could do that because I could afford to pay somebody to give our family the support that we'd need for me to do that, but I'm choosing not to. It's not the experience that I want to have. It's not the experience I want my son to have. So again, I'm fortunate enough to be able to be able to take a break and stop and do that. But that was our solution. That I'm essentially stopping for a while, and we're just gonna go on the road and be a touring family. So and then there was another one here about another bit in here. What was your first major label job, and how did you manage to get it? That's another really great question. I think it's another one of those things about sort of being ready for an opportunity when it's presented to you, like I just talked about. And so, having that passion and bringing as much experience and skills to those opportunities when they pop up, because they may not pop up a lot, and depending on where you are, it's so much about location and timing. Like, my first major label thing really was the band that I played in, and so we sort of made our own opportunity, and it took a lot of work. We worked on writing songs and demoing songs for years before that band got signed, and that was really my first sort of my way in. And there was even pivotal moments along the way. They wanted to hire producers, and we convinced them because the demos that we brought were so convincing that I should produce the record. And so I got to do that as a 20-year-old dude. And then they wanted to have somebody else mix the record. We let somebody else take a swing at it, and then I was like, I want my fair chance too. And I did mixes at Ocean Way Studio A, and I was so passionate, and I'd worked so hard on this record that I was able to win that fight. That was a door that got open for me. I had to walk through it and bring something of real value, and really reap the benefits of that opportunity being presented to me. Like, hey, you're being pitted up against one of the best mixers out there at the time. He just mixed like Aerosmith and all this other really wonderful, he's fucking badass mixer. But T-Ride was weird. Like, no, I don't think anybody could have stepped up and mixed that record. And so I was able to take advantage of that opportunity when it was presented to me. But then that project fell apart, and so I ended up taking sort of the path of least resistance just after T-Ride sort of unraveled. And I had this really great client that did hip-hop music, this guy named Paris. He was having a lot of success and had a lot of resources available, and so he just like locked out the studio. We really enjoyed working together. I did a bunch of records with him. He started a record label, and we did these albums for artists that he signed. We did albums for him, and so I worked on The Conscious Daughter and Paris and Four Deep and this other guy whose name I can't remember right now. But and so it was just it was great income. But at a certain point, I realized like I can make a living doing this, and it's allowing me to have a car and food and whatever. But I am not personally super passionate about hip hop music. I didn't really grow up listening to that, and I appreciate it. I respect it. I love listening to it. But it wasn't my true passion. And my passion is rock music. I grew up listening to Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd, and all that stuff. And so at a certain point, I realized like, if I'm never going to be Dr. Dre, because I'm just not as passionate about this as he is. I would finish the day's session working on Paris's stuff and get in my car and listen to Led Zeppelin. And so it didn't make sense for me to be investing my time in something that I wasn't truly passionate about. And so I made a decision, even as lucrative as it was at the time working for Paris. I told him, I gave him tons of notice, like, look, man, I have to go back to doing what I'm passionate about. And you, Paris, should be working with somebody who lives, breathes, thinks, is totally passionate about hip hop music, Like, you need to be working with somebody like that so you can have the best, engineering you could possibly get for this stuff. And this is just not what I live and breathe. I live and breathe rock music. And so I told him that in advance, and I'll work on your stuff until you can get into another situation that's better than what you got working with me. And so then went into some very lean times where I was like, okay, I got to find some rock bands to work with, and I was sort of out of that scene at this point because I'd been working just with Paris on his artists for like a year and a half or something, and so I just started putting the word out to any other bands that I knew, musicians I knew, any managers I knew. I still had some connections from T-Ride out there, and had a little ad in a local music magazine, and I was just selling studio time by the hour, and started to get some rock bands in, but I was like like broke beyond broke, super broke. Like the only way I could get food was like with a Chevron card. I called it Chevron. I would go to the Chevron station and get microwave burritos and stuff. And it was like that for almost a year. Went on like that. And but eventually, over time, I crossed paths with a band called Smash Mouth. And I crossed paths with a band called Third Eye Blind, and connected with artists where I was able to engage myself in the thing that I am truly passionate about. And even when there was times when I didn't have somebody paying me to record, I was still in that studio experimenting and working on my craft. And one of my favorite things to do was, I'm just going to pick a song and try and do a re-record of it and see how close I could get. A song that I loved the sound of. I did a lot of Led Zeppelin songs. I did, at one point, we did a Rage Against the Machine song, you know, just all rock songs that I just loved the sound of. And you know, I didn't have anybody waiting around, and so I could take a whole day if I wanted to just on the kick drum, you know. If I have access to the space, I would use that time to add more tools to my toolbox. So when I get in a room with a band, I can pull one of those out really quick. It's like, ooh, I know it worked really great when I put the 47 on the other side of the room and use that for the kick drum sound, you know, and just have that ready to go. And so you get really great results really fast once you get in a room with a band that's paying you, and things will definitely sort of snowball from there. And so that's the best thing that I could say is work on the thing that you are passionate about. It's where you're going to do your best work, and it's where you're going to get the best feedback, and things will build from there. The networking and stuff, I mean, that's always important now. It's all, you know, done through social media, and so definitely just do that stuff, you know. Get yourself out there and get engaged, you know, in the music scene. Go and see bands live, you know. Have a card, give them a card, say, hey man, I've got a studio, I think your band's incredible, maybe you guys want to come in and record a song, you know. Create opportunities for yourself. All right, let's see. So this one is from Anti-Teeter Music. Eric, thank you very much. How do you manage? Okay, yeah. So this is along the same. So there's a work-life balance. I've answered that part of it, and then any tricks on how to prove the overall quality of poorly recorded audio you didn't track but you received from the client and have to prepare and use in the mix without alternative of a re-recording. Okay, yeah. Yeah, that can be really challenging. Most of my experiences are me, you know, recording from the outset. So I don't have as much experience working with other people's recordings, but it has happened. And let's see. There's a good example. There was a Maroon 5 live thing that I did. I don't even know if anybody would be able to find this. It was a special thing that was done for some cell phone company or something like that. And they handed me live recording stuff that I would say did not sound awesome and was extremely challenging to work on. But it was one of these times and one of these things where I had a lot of time available and I just wanted to see how far I could go with it. And so, I took those tracks, took all the drum tracks, printed them to analog tape machines and did all kinds of processing stuff and reamped stuff through speakers in my sound room so I could get like a more sort of like studio explosive room sound on things. And most things you can fix. I think the only thing that is not unfixable if something is overcompressed. You cannot uncompress something that is overcompressed. So that's really the toughest nut to crack. Because once those dynamics are gone, it's almost impossible to get them back. But if something's EQ'd bad or whatever, you can always kind of wrangle things into place, especially now with plug-in EQs that are insanely powerful. So the tools are so transformative now that, as I've said before, given the time, I think you can probably, reinvent something more, even with the existing original tracks, more so now than when I was just working on a console decades ago. But a quick shortcut, as everybody knows, is if you got crappy drum recordings, samples can make a huge difference. I will definitely use samples if the drum sounds are just terrible, to just give me a little bit of help. But I do always start trying to get the drum sound with what was recorded. I try and respect that, and only bring in the samples at a point where I feel like, okay, this is just not going to happen with what's there. And so, I'm trying to think if there's anything else helpful I can say about that. But yeah, I use harmonic coloration, printing things to tape machines, reamping stuff, lots of very extreme EQ. If you have DIs, then, on bass or guitar, you can reamp stuff with real, with better sounding guitar amps and mic them properly, whatever. Somebody screwed that up. So there are options that you have that can be extremely transformative and really rescue something. I've done mixes more that I actually refer to them more as fixes than mixes. One of them was the 5 Seconds of Summer. You Look So Perfect. I'm trying to remember the title of the song. You Look So Perfect, standing there in my American Apparel underwear was the line of the song. It was their first big single, and it was actually a Jake Sinclair track, and he is an excellent engineer, and we actually talked about it at the outset. He's a busy dude working on all kinds of amazing stuff, and the thing that was handed to me was a songwriting demo. It was not a finished album track. and he was like, dude, I didn't even have time to try and make this a real album recording, so please do whatever you can to fix it. I'm on to something else. And so it got handed to me after a couple other people had tried to mix it. And so on that one, I actually did re-record stuff. I ended up getting some people together and singing background vocals and playing drums, and played guitar and did a bunch of stuff on that to try and fix it up a little bit, because the tracks that were there weren't actually intended to be used as a finished album, released recording. So I had carte blanche to do that. So if that's an option, that's also a great way to do it. All right, so now we got. Hey Eric, would you consider building UTA 500 series modules? Also, Third Eye Blind deconstruction soon? ? Okay. We have talked about doing 500 series stuff. It's really difficult for Undertone because Undertone is all Class A and uses a very specific type of voltage, bipolar 28 volts, and other voltages for biasing and stuff. And so we couldn't do it and really preserve what is unique about the Undertone stuff. I think the circuit designer Larry is so brilliant that if I really forced him to go down that road of doing some 500 series stuff, I know he would come up with something that sounds amazing. But it's pretty much impossible to have it be exactly the same as the rack mount gear, because the voltages that are necessary are just not available in a 500 series rack. But we are talking about it. I'll never say never. And then Third Eye Blind deconstruction, it is in the works. It's coming. It's not in the near future, but that's in the works. So, can you talk about songwriting and recording process for the T-Ride album? Drum and guitar tones were completely unique. Would love to gain insights. Okay. So yeah, T-Ride was a very, very unique project. Even since then, I've never worked on anything that was even remotely like it. Dan Arley, the singer, and really sort of the founder of the band, and it was really his vision with the band that sort of drove everything. was just, and I'm sure still is, just an insanely brilliant and out-of-the-box thinker of a human being. And so he just had a wildly unconventional approach to writing and creating music all the way across. And so a lot of the music was written on a Casio PT20 keyboard that had these programmable chords in it. And he would sequence in a sequence of chords that you could advance through with this little one key button. And it had these beautifully complex chords that you could put in there, these diminished chords and minor sixes and augmented chords and stuff. And so it was an easy way for him to put together these beautiful chord cadences for these songs. And he would write songs on the Casio first, and write vocal melodies to that. And a lot of times he would draw inspiration from other stuff. When we get into some T-Ride stuff, and I am going to do that. I'm going to do some T-Ride deconstructions. I'm going to reveal what the inspirations are for some of these things, because it's not subtle. Once you know what it is, it's like, oh my God, that is exactly that. And it's pretty fun when you find out what they are. And the inspirations are from the most unexpected places you could ever possibly imagine, and that's why it was never an issue. So the band kind of, I don't know, whatever, it sounded like Queen and, Nine Inch Nails, or I don't know what people compared it to. But those were the last places in the universe that he would ever draw inspiration from. And so once we had the chords and the melody, and really the music was kind of a science project. Once we had the chords and the melody, then the next step was to figure out a groove and sort of like a way for a rock band to play it. And so that was at times was really where my contribution came in. And so a lot of times I was working on these instrumental sort of like groove template things where I would record stuff that I just thought sounded cool and had a cool riff to it or something. And so then we would have to try and marry those two things together and have the groove going and have the riff playing through all of these complicated chord changes. And so sometimes it was an issue of, breaking it up between the elements that were available. And so there would be a drum pattern playing with a bass part, and the bass notes, we would figure out a bass part that would play in the key and chase the chords around. And then the guitar had sort of like a phrasing or a riff to it, and we'd figure out how to get that riff to reflect the chord changes at times. And if there were places where the guitar couldn't cover it, then harmony vocals would come in and cover the chord changes. So everybody was trying to help cover all of these complicated chord changes and the melody that Dan had written. And then the lyrics were really just like, a product of Dan's just his psyche, just things that sort of came out of his conscious or subconscious, and they reflect a lot of his sort of take on the world and humanity and stuff. And he there's a lot of kind of coded stuff in there about how he feels about things. And so the lyrics were entirely him. He would just come up with stuff that he thought was cool, and I always agreed. And then the drum and guitar tones. The drum stuff just sort of evolved over time. We were always sort of unsatisfied with the sound of just putting mics on a drum kit. I just didn't have the experience yet at that point to figure out how to get the explosive power and punch out of drums that we wanted. The only thing that we could figure out to do was to program the kick and snare drum with a sequencer. And I was using an Atari 1040 ST computer to do it, and an Akai S1000 sampler to sample the sounds. And the sounds were always a combination of custom samples that I made, where I could sample a kick drum being played in a room and have that room sound isolated so I could have as much room sound as I want without cymbals getting in it and stuff. So you get a more powerful sort of explosive room sound. And then I blended that with samples that I got from other records that I really liked. There's a whole lot of samples of the kick drum from the Power Station record. There's a whole drum intro on a song where he's going boom, 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 bop, boom, 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 bop. And those kick drum sounds are incredible. And so I just grabbed multiple hits. And it was cool because there's a bunch of hits there. And so I had 4 different hits that I used from that Power Station recording. And so that, a lot of time, was sort of leading the way with the sampled part of it. And then I added reverb. The drums, we just wanted to be as huge and cavernous and explosive as possible. So the same thing with a snare drum. There was usually a custom sample that I made, layered with either Power Station or Led Zeppelin drum samples. All that kind of stuff was blended in there. I was always trying to find isolated, drum hits that were really cool and explosive sounding to blend in there. The guitar stuff was relatively straightforward. It was mostly just a Marshall head with a 412, and I used some pedals before it, usually like a little bit of EQ and a little extra gain. I had like this micro amp, the MXR micro amp, to add more gain going into the Marshall. It was an unmodified Marshall head. Occasionally a little extra distortion. I also had this Roland GP8 guitar effects processor where you could have 8 different guitar pedals, of these Roland type pedals. So there's sometimes some extra gain from that. The big thing is the gating, and so I feel like we actually really innovated this whole thing. We started doing this in the 80s. I'd never heard of anybody ever doing anything like this before, where we would sequence in the computer a pattern that would externally trigger a gate to open, and you would run the guitar through that gate. So as you're playing, the gate is cutting the sound in and out with this very specific rhythmic pattern, and that's what made those like bap 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 bap, those very percussive, syncopated guitar type things. I'm going to demonstrate how to do that at some point in the not too distant future. So that's kind of a good overview of what was unique about that stuff. Okay, so Andrew Masters is asking, in 2 weeks I'm beginning construction on a home studio that is about 300 square feet. I mostly intend on doing mix work and some overdubs, but I will record drums in this room occasionally. Any tips on flooring materials or treatment techniques that would differ from your tuning, your room, speakers, video? Yeah, well, it sounds like 300 square feet. That's it's close to similar size to my room in Topanga, which is the room that you see in the speaker tuning thing. Man, do I love that room. Holy mackerel. So it would be hard for me to recommend anything significantly different from that. I was expecting that to just be a mix room, and drums record so beautifully in that room that there were moments on this last Grace Potter record where we just couldn't beat the drum sound that I got in my little Topanga room. Granted, it's not a big ambient space, so you're not going to get a big room sound in there, but there's definitely something about it where the drums sound so punchy, and it's like the low end of the drum is the focus in the microphones, not the like high harsh part. And so, man, was that an unexpected success with that room. And so I highly recommend that approach, which is it's just a concrete floor, because this was a garage. It just had a concrete floor. I painted it with whatever that special paint is for painting your garage floor, and just so I could seal it up so it's not dusty in there. So yeah, painted concrete floor. I think I mentioned in that other video, super deep, bass trapping all the way around the room, all 3 walls, and then the 4th wall is all quite thin windows, and I have curtains that I can pull in front of those. With the insulation, I used Rockwool Safe and Sound in the walls. The important trick is to like not have it flush up against the wall. If you have it come off the wall a little bit, it lowers the lowest frequency that it will absorb. And also the other important thing is to not compress it. It's actually designed to be efficient without it being compressed. If you compress it too much, it actually doesn't work as well. So I think a lot of people make that mistake. And then there are bass traps all around the top corners of the room. Those are also used for lighting soffits, so you get really beautiful soffit-mounted lighting all around the perimeter of the room. And so that's basically it. And then you just stretch fabric over over all the bass trapping, and you will have yourself an incredible recording space. I don't really think it would work. It certainly wouldn't work for me to have an ambient recording room that you're also trying to use to mix. It would be way too confusing for me to, hear the ambience of that room while I'm mixing. If it's also in the recordings, I just wouldn't know. Everything would end up way too dry. So I think your best bet is to go for a drier space. So it will definitely work for mixing, and just have it so it's a musical sounding space. That's what I ended up with in Topanga, and I'm totally delighted to record in there. So I even did a bunch of other stuff. Vocals sound amazing in there. There's one song on this new record where Grace and I recorded live in that room. She was playing electric guitar and singing, and I was playing drums, all in a room that is about 300 square feet, and it sounds incredible. That's the one that we couldn't beat at Barefoot. So yeah, you guys can check that out when it comes out. It's called Shout It Out. Okay. Simon Walls is asking, hey Eric, I really enjoy your videos. So I produce a lot of artists in very, very remote places, sometimes without electricity, with minimal gear. I wonder what would be your go-to recording equipment if you had to record an artist in a remote place, and that would fit in a backpack. Thanks. Okay. So in a backpack, I mean, there's a couple variables there. I'm assuming that I'm just going to assume that you will be able to plug into a power source. If you had to run off of batteries, that's a whole other can of worms, I think. But let's assume you can plug your stuff in. I think for me, I would go for the Antelope Orion converter. I use that at my Topanga studio, so I'm familiar with it as a converter. You get so much from that thing for so little it cost. I'm just blown away by how much they can pack into that thing. So you would have plenty of inputs. So just that and a laptop, and you're good to go. I would not bother with trying to bring a bunch of fancy preamps and stuff. I don't think you could ever bring enough that you could carry in a backpack to really make a difference. And the way I would approach that is use something that's really transparent, like the Orion. That thing's not trying to really sound like anything, which is my preference. And so it would either be that or the Lynx Aurora. That's the other one that I would consider bringing. They're just invisible sounding as far as I can tell. And capture everything in as clean as possible. No compression, no EQ, no nothing. And once you get back into a space where you can really hear it, then I would reprocess everything. And that would give me the option of using real analog compressors, or running it through tape machines, or using vintage EQs and running it through, you can run it through an old Neve, mic preamp at that point, and get all the color that you want in a controlled work environment. Just capture it super clean, do all the crazy color once you have control over it in another space. And so I would go for laptop, either the Lynx Aurora or the Orion, and whatever mics you need, and you'd be good to go. Awesome. Good question. Okay. Do you have any favorite songs to reference while mixing? Yes, I do. I definitely still reference stuff all the time. And I'm going to pull that up here on my laptop, and I'll scroll through it. Everybody, you can all check this out. I keep, a collection of references, a little playlist in Spotify that I can pull up, anywhere whenever I'm doing stuff. I think referencing mixes is really, really important. even when I'm working in my own space and I'm really familiar with the speakers, I still just at the beginning of the day, starting out of nowhere and not really knowing where my ears are at yet, because my ears, as I mentioned, they sort of change through the course of the day. You know, I need to have some sort of reference point for me to start from. And I also like to just have something that I know I love the sound of, that I can just switch to and at any moment just go, oh yeah, I love that. And make sure that the thing that I'm working on now, I love that too. And so I reference stuff all the time. It's a big part of my process. And so here we go. Let me pull this up here. Okay, I'll get this out of the way. Okay, so here it is. These are, you know, a current collection of references. I've used lots of different stuff over the years, and I've been sort of adding to this at times. And so, so here you go. I love the sound of this. This to me is one of the best rock mixes ever in the history of rock music. This "Show Me How to Live" Audio Slave, Rich Costi. Just I don't know. The guy he's got some sort of magical thing going on that I don't know how to do, and that song is proof of it, man. It's incredible sounding. I love listening to that mix. It's just super inspiring. Also kind of frustrating because it's an anomaly. I don't know how he got it to sound like that, and so I don't feel like I ever quite get there, but it's inspiring to shoot for. And then Tom Petty, "You Don't Know How It Feels." It's a very, very bright mix, and I kind of use that as like, I don't ever want to be brighter than this, you know. And that's kind of like, yeah, that's as far as I'd ever want to go. And it's such a great room sound on the drums and stuff. It's a great reference. No Quarter, Led Zeppelin, I love that. The drums are drier on that, but that song just has incredible mid-range without being unpleasant. You know, it's a really beautiful sounding mid-range. When the Levee Breaks, that's always good. Feel Good Incorporated, the Gorillaz, that, man, the low end on that is so dope. I believe that's Spike Stent that mixed that. Incredible job on that mix. Just love it. That's how I know if, you know, my low end is really actually doing something good. Couple of familiar things of my own. Burning Man, Third Eye Blind. That was the only song that was actually mixed at Hunk of Shit Studios back in '96. Good For You. That was mixed at the site. And so there are sort of two ends of the spectrum off that record. I love Chad Blake's mixing off of this Black Keys record. It's just a great low-end reference. You know, he, I think, in the realm of music where it's like drums, bass, and guitar, he introduced a whole other octave of low-end into that universe, you know, and it's so cool the way he does it. So I've been chasing that, and I love that stuff. Bjork, Army of Me, that's a cool, aggressive, sort of synthy kind of thing. And then this hyper ballad is amazing because it has an 808 sample that's being pitched around, or something that sounds kind of like an 808 pitched around, a low synthy thing. And so you can kind of, you know, if I'm checking out speakers, it's a good indication if I'm in an unfamiliar place, how consistent the low end is in the space that I'm working in. Death Ray, this was one that I did, this song called Only Lies. Muse, Time Is Running Out, another Costi. He is just badass. I love these mixes, but they're unique in a particular way that I fell in love with the way these mixes sound on the radio. They sound incredible on the radio, and when the radio adds a little extra hype, it ends up perfect on the radio. When I listen to it in my control room, they almost seem a little bit flat to me, like a little underhyped maybe, I don't know, but it was just so fascinating to me how they translated that I still reference those as like, okay, you don't have to hype it that much. You know, the radio can add that last bit. Radiohead, you know, Nigel Godrich, he makes incredible records. Here's more Chad Blake mixing. This is another thing that probably that I recorded. I think nobody's ever heard of this artist named Aslan. I did a few songs on there. Ain't No Love was the one that I did, and I just liked the low end on the kick drum and stuff. It was a good reference for me. Beck, Morning Phase, Sea Change, beautiful songs to reference, beautiful recordings for acoustic guitars and stuff. This is one that came up more recently, Andrew Bird. This I think is another Chad Blake mix, but there was a couple people that were involved in mixing it. It sounds to me like his mixing, but that's just an incredible recording and great low end. Here's another Black Keys one that I added more recently. So there you go. That's stuff that I like to check out when I'm getting excited about mixing. All right, let's see. I'll go back here. Okay, so now next one from Elder Children. Two questions. Okay, would you ever do a bare essentials vid, as in like my $10,000 studio or something like that? Would be super great to see what you do on a budget and practical. I could probably do that real quick now. So like a laptop or a computer. One of the two interfaces I just mentioned, either the Antelope Orion or the Lynx Aurora. And then with this, we're talking about a complete recording setup. So I would go for definitely a pair of distressors. Those are the ultimate Swiss Army knife. I can fight my way out of anything with those compressors. Let's see. So right now we're probably about probably a little over $5,000 into this at this point. Let's see what else we can squeeze in there. Definitely would want to have a 57 for overheads. Boy, that's a little tougher. Good condenser mics for overheads. I mean, you know what? I would probably go for a pair of Coles 4038s. I love room mics. Those things are just so good on everything. And let's see what else. Yeah, 57 Coles 4038s. I need something for low end. So, we got to have one good condenser in there. So there was an affordable mic by SE called a Titan that was really good. I was using that for a while for kick drum and bass guitar and stuff. It's similar to a 47 FET, that kind of a thing. And I'm just not as familiar with some of the knockoff microphones that would be more affordable. I know some of them are really, really great and would do a great job. I just don't have experience with them. So I was lucky and I was able to pick up, the original ones when they weren't totally unobtainable and unaffordable. So yeah, I apologize. I would have to do some research to do a better job of that, but I hope that's a good start there. Okay, let's see. And then the next question was, I appreciate your Quanta Queens of the Stone Age video immensely. I'm sure you get a lot of questions about this, best sounding record, but I'd love to know any anecdotes about workflow of that record. We hear all the vague tales about it being some wild time, but I'd absolutely love to hear any specific experience or observation. Yeah, the workflow was very similar to what I explained earlier, that there was pre-production to make sure people would know what they were supposed to play. Sometimes the pre-production was being done right before we actually recorded it because there were some, unexpected changes in who was playing drums, and but generally the same principle. There's a rehearsal and pre-production part. Then you go in and record it. We recorded basics onto 16 track, and so that was drums, bass, and an initial guitar pass that Josh played, and then I made slave reels or work reels, and we did overdubbed additional guitars, pianos, vocals, weird sound effects, all that stuff happened, overdubbing, and then ultimately it was mixed by Adam Casper. So workflow was very straightforward. There's no big surprises in there. Let's see, anecdotes. The one thing that I will, there was a couple things that were really fun and hilarious about Dave Grohl's involvement. He just brings incredible energy and spirit into any room that he walks into. He's just a wonderfully energetic, super inspired dude that just loves to play drums. And so one of the things that I loved that was super funny was when we were doing takes of songs, and this was actually in the first round. In August, in the beginning of August, we did the first initial 3 songs with him. I don't remember which song it was, but like we were doing takes of the song, and at a certain point, like anybody would, he had to get up and go and pee or whatever, go to the bathroom. And so they're like in the middle of takes, and he was like, hold on, I gotta go pee. And so he gets up to walk out of the room, and Josh and Nick start giving him shit about, oh, come on, man, we're right in the middle of this, blah, blah, blah. And so as he's walking out the door, he just holds up his hand and flips them off and says, Nirvana, bitch, and walked out of the room. It was all in good fun, and everybody fucking died laughing. But, it's just one of the, he'll do that. Just like there's moments where he just says, Nirvana, motherfucker, like I played in that band, so you just have to put up with whatever. But it's all in good fun. And then the other thing that was really funny with him, I just talked about his unbreakable spirit, and we had him do this thing of overdubbing the cymbals, and totally game for it. And so we set him up with cymbal pads, so he was playing on plastic cymbal pads, so we could hear cymbal samples that he was triggering with the pads while we were doing the takes with the band, and then replace them with real cymbals after the fact. And so it wasn't until we had to do the real cymbals as an overdub that it got really hard, because he's trying to recreate the performances that he did. And so we set him up with a drum kit where all the drums were muted with towels on them, detuned, and we put foam inside the drums to get them as quiet as possible, so he could sort of mime what he was doing without hearing the sound of the drums and only play the cymbals. And it was really fucking hard, and because he improvised a lot of the drum parts live in the moment when we were tracking with the band. And there was a certain point when he got super frustrated with it. And by the way, we're trying to punch through these on analog tape, which is not particularly forgiving, especially with a bunch of ringing cymbals. It's not like, punching in the computer. You can't just punch in and out anywhere you want and fix and put crossfades on things. It doesn't work that way. And so most of the time, it's like you need to remember everything up through the first chorus, and then there's a good break where we can punch in. Maybe you could punch 2 or 3 times throughout the song. So he had to really memorize what he played before and play exactly that as the cymbals would have been had he done it with the live performance. And there was a certain point where he had just had it, and he screamed in the room, whose fucking idea was this? Like, this is impossible. And it took a second for him to compose himself, and then he was back in it and totally game again. But and I switched over to tracking the overdub cymbals in the computer. It was one of those moments where I made a decision, as a guy working on this record, that this is an unrealistic expectation of Dave Grohl, and it's bumming him out, and I'm losing his enthusiasm for this process. So I am going to make the change myself to keep him enjoying this process and inspired about playing this part. And so it's like, fuck the damn tape machine for now. I'm just going to set it up. We'll do this on the computer, and we'll get this done really quick and easy, and I'll be able to clean things up later and fix the punches and shit, and everything's going to be great, and make this actually, humane for him to do. And so that decision was made. So there you go. There's a couple little anecdotes for you. There's no shortage of those from that project, but hopefully there'll be more opportunities to share those. Okay, next we have Tio Colombaroto. I apologize about the name here. What are the best tips you can give on how to best manage musicians in the studio and how to improve the recording experience with a band? Personally, I feel that human relationships in the process of recording an album are fundamental, and often I see inexperienced engineers treat with disregard their musicians' session man, or giving little importance to the human side of things. They don't offer him a cup of tea. They don't argue with him about production. They don't ask if the headphone mix is okay. They don't compliment him at the end of good take, etc. Yeah, I mean, those are all good points. So I think you have a relatively good handle on this. But man, that is everything, to succeed or fail on a recording project. At times, I actually feel like it's more important than the results at a certain point. Jeff Emmerich wrote a great book about working, on all the Beatles records, and he talks about this a lot as well. That your rapport with the musicians is so important. It's kind of everything. Not only for what I've already talked about, the trust and confidence thing, but also so like there's just a sense of camaraderie in the room and everybody's having a good time. It's really, really important to do that. My goal on an album project is, I certainly want to make a great sounding record and have it be, successful for the band, but I really want them to enjoy the experience as well. I want to enjoy the experience. I mean, for a long time, my life was only just being in a studio with bands. And if we're not having fun together, then my life isn't fun, because that was my life for a long, long time. So it was really important for me to have a good time in the studio. And so, I've done stuff. Whenever I feel people getting fatigued and really burnt out, man, I fucking stop. There was one time I took Good Charlotte to Six Flags Magic Mountain. Like, we need a break. Let's just get out of here and go and, have some fun. And so I will do stuff like that, or change to another environment. I mentioned that with the Queens of the Stone Age, that there were just way too many distractions in LA. So we moved to a place where we could sort of sequester away and really focus on finishing it. That was sort of the opposite problem, I guess. They were having too much fun in Los Angeles. And so, I think you really have to feel it out with the artist. And so I'm very, very sensitive to that. I know that working with Slash, he has a limited tolerance for getting sounds. There's just a certain point where it's like, I'm ready to play now. And so let's start recording, because I'm not going to sit here and watch you move around mics anymore. I'm not here to do that, And so with him, I would always make an effort to minimize that as much as I possibly could. And so I would always pre-prepare for his sessions and make sure I have everything ready to go. So he can walk in, pick up a guitar, and hear a great sound coming out of the speakers immediately, and maybe he would want to change something, and so it's his choice to do that. And I, have options ready to go and stuff, but like, those things are super, super important, and I think they are the reason that you get asked back to work multiple times with an artist. In Slash's case, I was fortunate enough to make 2 records with him, because we had a great time working together on the first record that we did. And so, I think it's mostly just being really aware of it, and I've seen engineers make that same mistake. I was in a very awkward situation one time where a very inexperienced person was I think poorly chosen to be in the position of producer when Stuart Copeland was in the room tracking drums, and this person didn't have the experience or knowledge to be given that responsibility. I was there engineering, just helping out. They wanted to record it barefoot, and I was excited to record drums with Stuart Copeland. And this guy was painfully unaware of maintaining communication with Stuart Copeland in the room. And there were these painful moments where I could just feel the seconds ticking away, where Stuart Copeland is sitting in the drum room in silence while this guy is having a conversation with people in the room. And I'm like, dude, you have to tell him that we're talking, or something. Like, you have to let him know what's going on, so he's not just sitting there in a vacuum, like wondering what's going on. It was painful to watch, and so a lot of times, like musicians, like, you just play something, and a musician's first thought is, I wonder if that's good. I wonder if people are happy with that. And when there's just silence afterwards, and the musician is left sitting there, what are they talking about in there? Like, if they're having to talk about it this long, it must not be good, It's the worst thing to do to a musician. You have to communicate with them. And in that particular instance, it kept happening over and over again, and also like they just didn't have a vision for this, and they kept trying different things, and it kept going in circles. It was so painful to watch, and at a certain point there was another one of these long silences where nobody was talking to him, and I just saw in the monitor, I have a video monitor at Barefoot where I can see the musicians. I just saw Stuart just packing up his stuff in the room, just getting ready to leave. He had just had enough, and so there, after another long conversation, and I'm watching him pack up all of his drumsticks and stuff in the room, they were going to, try and ask him to do another take. And at the end of the conversation, I said, I think he's done. I don't think I don't think you're going to get another take out of him. And he was gone. By the time they turned around and looked at the monitor, he'd already walked away from the drum kit. So it's really, really important. If you want to work with somebody twice, make sure they have a good time. Okay. Okay, so here's the next thing. How do you save label sessions during the production mixing process? So during recording, do you have one saved session file you keep coming back to and adding to, or do you save each session as a new version? I hope that makes sense. Also, what external hard drives do you record to recommend during album or when you send off labels? Okay, yeah. So yeah, I just keep my one main version of the session going, and there might be a significant moment in the evolution of the process where I have to change something significant. Maybe I totally do a whole new tempo map for the song, and so I will rename it and keep that previous version in the main folder available. But obviously Pro Tools now is always keeping backup versions of stuff as you go, so I have those, and so the way I do it with the hard drives is I have my main hard drive that I'm recording on with my current projects. That drive is synced to Dropbox, so it's always syncing everything to Dropbox. Sometimes it'll work where I can have it doing that during the session during the day. Sometimes it slows down the drive too much, and I have to just, at the end of the session, I'll turn on Dropbox and it'll just upload everything at the end of the session. I also will have a backup drive of that, and so I use SyncX, and so I just have a scheduled backup. So every night, in the middle of the night, it will just back up to the backup drive. So that information exists in 3 places. It's on the main working drive, it's in the cloud on Dropbox, and it's on a backup drive. So, and then I use Glyph drives. I've been happy with them. Been using them for a long time. And when I send off to the label, I use one of their little smaller black box drives. They're affordable. They're like $100 a piece, and or more affordable, I guess. And so I usually have a stripped down version where I send them versions of the session that don't have all of the other takes and all the other playlists and stuff. I delete all that stuff out and just have what was actually used. I send them only that stuff, so it's not this gigantic fucking terabyte size thing. And so I can usually fit it easily on a 500 gigabyte Glyph little black box drive and send it off to the label, the artist, and the management. And so everybody has a copy of it, so it exists in multiple places. So yeah, there you go. Okay, Eddie Ruff, if you could talk about the business side of things, that would be helpful. For example, early on in your career, did you change hourly or per project? Was it a verbal agreement or did you make a contract? Wow, really, really good question. So there's a very specific threshold that I use for whether or not you need a contract with a band. So if a band is coming in, earlier on, when they were just paying me by the hour to come in and record, that was always just verbal. We would agree on a day rate or an hourly rate. They come in, and sometimes I was able to get a deposit, sometimes I didn't. It really sort of depended on the circumstances. And generally it always worked out great for me. There was only a couple times I got stiff, but that was very rare when somebody actually really didn't pay me. One of the times was actually Smash Mouth. They didn't pay me for a year after I recorded their initial demos, and then they came back, finally paid me, and then we finished their first record, Fush You Ming. And so if you're expecting to get royalties on a recording that you did, you have to have a contract. That is a complicated administrative process to have that happen. And so you need to have a legally binding contract that entitles you to those, that ownership of that intellectual property. And then in order for you to get into the accounting process with a record label, whether it's a major label or an indie or whatever, there's a thing called a letter of direction, which is derived from your contractual agreement with the band, that is given to the record company, that gets added into their accounting system. It's an official document that goes into their accounting system that will generate those checks for you. So I couldn't imagine doing a project with where I'm expecting to be paid royalty producer points without having a contract. It's just way too complicated to expect that to just happen. So that's kind of a good way to parse it between contracts or not. Okay, here's one. Do you have plans to monetize a la Huart or Beto, Club Academy, Cool Kids Table? You should. A bunch of us would be in for that. Well, I'm trying to figure that out. I mean, right now I'm having fun doing this, and so I'm just doing it. And I've considered a couple of possibilities for monetizing it. I still have to look into this, but I think if I monetize it on YouTube, it changes my the freedom I have for using copyrighted material. And so right now I think I get a lot of leeway because I'm not paying for people, I'm not asking people to pay to subscribe to this experience. And so I don't know, I'll look into it. If I don't have to, I won't. I've been very lucky in my life, and I'm not really motivated by money. And so if I'm having fun, I'll keep doing it. If the other thing that I've considered is doing a live in-person version of this, where people can purchase, an admission to go to a live in-person event at Barefoot Recording, where we pull up a specific song. It would be a very small group of people. This is one possible iteration of it. Maybe there's only 10 people in the room, or maybe just 6 people in the room. And we spend a couple hours with everybody in the room where we're going through it and how everything was recorded. And you can actually be in the rooms and see the equipment that was used. And maybe I can even set up the session again. You can see everything that was done on it, see how it was mixed, all of that stuff, solo stuff, play around with the gear, the whole thing, so that we do, a couple of hours with everybody in the room experiencing everything, and then each person would get an hour privately with me to, do whatever, check out whatever. And so it would be an 8-hour day, 2 hours with everybody, and then each person gets an individual, private hour checking stuff out. So that's one possibility that I'm thinking about, and so that would definitely be a paid experience. And so maybe it just gets monetized that way, and I don't have to go through the complications of trying to monetize it through YouTube or whatever. So I don't know, but I'm open to suggestions, whatever you all think. I could go the like Sam Harris route, and if people want to donate money for this, then that would be awesome. But yeah, for now, we're just gonna keep it like this. So. Okay, yeah, this was another one. Do you give private lessons? I'm trying to say live in the Netherlands and learn about it. And so I would not do private lessons, but I would do what I just described. These like live in-person version of these deconstructions or drum recording, day, or mixing something type day. So, that is potentially going to be an option in the future. I'm looking into it. Okay, so then Ostap Chovgan. I apologize. Okay. I'm an aspiring producer and looking to go to college for music production. I've been producing on and off for the last year or so, but I've struggled to take my mixes any farther than standard compression EQ. Your videos really helped me, but I still feel I'm at a very basic level. What helped you bring your mixes to the next level, and how did you learn to mix? Okay, yeah. And there's another question about the drum panning on Song for the Dead. Here, I think this is the best trick in the universe for mixing. And I've talked about this a little bit in the past, but like, if you ever have an opportunity to, the best way to learn how to get the results you want is to find a final mix that you love the sound of and try to match it. I did so much of this early on when I was working on stuff. I would just pick a song and go like, I'm just going to try and recreate this song exactly and see how close I can get. It was amazing for developing my engineering skills. I may have come up with solutions that were totally different than what the original engineer used for placing mics or whatever, but it helped me get to the result that I wanted. And then ultimately when I was mixing, if you can A/B back and forth, use a spectrum analyzer, sometimes that can be very revealing. When you're actually comparing the same source material, you can, see in the spectrum analyzer. I used to do that like with Def Leppard kick drum sounds. They had some isolated kick drum sounds, and I would sample it and play it back in a spectrum analyzer with either it was EQ'd, and then look at my kick drum and be like, of course that's not going to sound the same. The frequency spectrum is not even remotely close, and it's amazing when you match up those curves how close things start to sound. So use references and use that to guide you to the sound that you want. The principles are pretty straightforward. Brighter, bassier, more compressed, less compressed. Though once you kind of develop your ear for how those things respond and how it sort of affects what you're hearing come out of the speaker, it's pretty straightforward how they get applied, and you can usually anticipate in what you're hearing, like, oh, that sounds more compressed, or that's brighter, or that's bassier, and navigate your way there. Cool, good question. The songs for the Dead drum panning. I don't know. I didn't mix it, so I don't know why that choice was made. I think it was a great choice. It's very unexpected. I thought it was really cool. Kristen Oscarson. Do you think there are multiple ways to acquire the same result in mixing? Do you think you could mix a record and have, for example, 3 totally different sounding mixes with different approaches that you would be satisfied with? Wow, that's an interesting question. I think so. I've definitely been in situations where, and in fact, recently I mixed a new Third Eye Blind song, and I wanted to take a very extreme approach to it. And Stephen and I actually talked about it at the outset via text. And I told him, like, I can do this the way, the first Third Eye Blind record was done. We can just try and go that route. Or we can, if you want me to, we can go with how I'm sort of approaching things now. I have some very specific opinions about how I want to approach rock mixing now. And he was like, fuck it, let's try the new approach, And so I did it, and it was definitely a little too extreme for him. It sounded wildly different than what he sent me. And then, we were like, oh, okay, that may be a little too far out. But it was really cool. I thought it was a really cool way to approach it. And I think could have totally worked. And so, I ended up sort of massaging it back to closer to where, the other stuff that we had done together, which also worked out great. So, in that case, there were definitely 2 different takes on it, both of which I think were very valid and had, were totally justifiable and musical and satisfying to listen to. But ultimately, I wanted to make sure Stephen was happy with it. And so, I pushed it closer to what really felt right for him and the rest of the record, because I was only mixing one song. So there you go. So yeah, the answer is yes. Okay. Can you talk a little bit about how you address sub 100 hertz, 100 hertz content in your mixes, specifically relationship between kick and bass? Yeah, that's a really tricky area. I used to do it earlier on, so like in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s. I was in this place where the kick drum was was a little bit higher in this punchier range. It was more in the like 80, 90 kind of range, and wasn't super deep, and had the bass be more subby. And because at that time I wasn't doing any real fancy stuff, and so low E on a bass guitar is down like around 42, 43 hertz, and so I could have the bass really be that sort of subby part of it, and the kick drum punch through on top of it, and not have them competing as much for the same space. Things have changed a little bit in the modern world, and so kick drums have just gotten sort of deeper and deeper and deeper, and I actually really enjoy it. You saw my references. I just love that there's tons of 40 hertz on the kick drum in these Black Keys songs, and on the Arctic Monkeys record and stuff. Chad Blake has totally cracked the code on that. And so I've been doing more of my version on that. So I'm including more sub information in the kick drum. And the only way I've really been able to get that to work is to sidechain the bass guitar, whatever the bass element is, whether it's a synth or a bass guitar. If you're going to have two things that are trying to compete for that same frequency range, it's really helpful to have the bass guitar just get turned down instantaneously every time. That brief moment when the kick drum hits, to make room for the kick drum and not run out of headroom in the overall mix. And also the interaction between those two, the phasing interaction, can be very arbitrary depending on what the source materials are, especially if it's a real electric bass being played live. Sometimes those frequencies will line up in a way where they will add a lot of volume, and sometimes they'll add up in a way where they're canceling volume if they're equal volume and they're sharing the same frequency range. And so, doing that sidechain ducking of the bass guitar when the kick drum hits minimizes, that unpredictability of the phase interaction. So, I try to compartmentalize things as much as I can down there. And, the guitars, I will remove, stuff below 100 hertz on the guitars pretty consistently. That's almost a given on mixes. I just won't leave any necessary sub information floating around down there. If the guitar is not actually playing notes that are resonating in those frequencies, then I'm just going to filter it off, so I don't have sub information just rattling around down there for no good reason. Okay, cool. So here we go. Antonio Robbins is asking, when you do projects like 5 Seconds of Summer, Sounds Good, Feels Good, where you mix and master the project while not recording or producing, what changes do you have in your mix process? Obviously, you don't have intimate knowledge of the recordings, but do you find yourself working harder or easier? Does your Pro Tools template change? Interesting question. I mean, I generally approach things kind of the same in most cases. In the specific instance of that record, the recordings, they definitely used a template, for how they recorded that stuff. So on pretty much every single song, it was the same drum sounds, the same guitar sounds. They were maybe in different combinations and stuff, and there were some exceptions here and there, but generally things were pretty similar from song to song. So usually what I'll do is I spend a lot of time on the first song. I'll spend a couple days, maybe a few days on the first song. I'll try and get all the way through it the first day, listen to it in my car, take it around, do a much more experimentation, see if I can beat things, try and really get it right on the first song, and do all of the experimentation there, and then use that as my template for the rest of the record. I find if I don't really get it pinned down on the first song, I'm just kind of, experimenting through the whole process, and it's not as cohesive sounding, and the whole thing ends up taking longer because I'm just kind of searching the whole time. And a lot of times on projects like that, there are a little more time constraints. Everybody is always like, hey, can you mix this? It needed to be done yesterday, And so on that project, once I got through the first song, it really was like they needed a song done a day. And so it was a pretty intense mix schedule. And so every day I would try and leave with a finished mix that I could sleep on and print in the morning, and then start another one really quick, and try and do a song a day on that one. That's challenging for me. I'm slow. But yeah, good question. I think it is a little bit different than doing my own stuff. I think the other part of it is that on my own stuff, sometimes I get tripped up because I'm attached to certain things that I had envisioned early on. Whereas when somebody hands me something, I'm not attached to anything at all. And I think I can actually move a little bit faster on other people's stuff because I don't have this grand vision that I've been chasing through the whole process. And I can just go, oh, this is working. That's not. I don't care about this track. I don't care how many hours somebody spent on this. I'm fucking muting it, and just get through it way easier because I'm super objective and have no emotional attachment to anything that's there, and I'm just there, only focusing on what's going to sound great. So I think in some ways it's actually easier. All right. How do you track a song and avoid buildup in the 250-ish muddy area without leaving things too thin, muddy? Looking for your thought process as you are tracking, or is it something you save for the mix phase? I think he meant to say mix phase later. What frequency would you focus on for the kick drum in today's pop rock stuff? Okay, in general, video on low end tracking to mix would be amazing. Yeah, so there's a couple different things here. I like to use tape machines still, and most of the things that I track, I'm trying to capture things through a tape machine. I have to EQ before things hit tape because if I print something at a good volume, that's metering properly on a tape machine, and all of that muddy 250-ish range that, clouds up everything, I think we're all taking that shit out. That's what really opens things up. If I leave all that in when it goes to the tape machine and I take it out later, it ends up being way too hissy because I can put way more level of the frequencies I'm going to be using on tape if I take that shit out first. So I almost always inevitably do that. And so, yeah, so I definitely do that. And, the too thin, too muddy balance there. I don't know. You can kind of do it to taste. I think, excuse me, and in the 90s, people were really pulling that stuff out a lot, and they've stopped doing that a bit more now, more recently. I think I prefer how people are doing it now and leaving more of that stuff in there. There's cool ways to do it where you can have bursts of that information where it's not clouding up the mix, but it sort of punches through. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. And I kind of prefer that. I don't like things to be too gouged out and overly hyped. It's just not as enjoyable to turn up at a certain point. And I think the guy that's super incredible at that is Sean Everett. I don't know if you've been checking out his mixes, but his work on Alabama Shakes and the more recent, I can't remember her name now. I don't know. I'm terrible at remembering names. But yeah, his mixes are incredible, and he has tons of that mid-range, that low mid-range stuff in there, and it's super satisfying. There's times where I'm like, really? You actually, how do you get away with leaving all of that in there? But he does, and they keep giving him mountains of Grammys because he's just awesome. He makes it work. So yeah, I kind of prefer figuring out a way to have it in there and have it be just warmer and more natural sounding. Okay, how do you try to do it? I just talked about the kick drum stuff. Okay, yeah, and I'm sure there'll be opportunities to have more stuff about shaping the low end on things. Okay, we're probably just about out of time. I'm doing this while Sagan is taking a nap, but when he wakes up, that'll be the alarm that it's time to wrap it up. But he's still sleeping, so here we go. Okay, so Jordan Barnett. My question is about lead vocal EQ. You say you have typical rock band setup, and you have a vocal that was recorded. Say you have a typical rock band setup, and you have a vocal that was recorded well, but you need it to cut through the blend of electric guitars, bass, and drums. How might someone like me approach the EQ on the vocal to make it more present and cut through? I feel like the Third Eye Blind records, there is a lot of 1.5K and maybe some shelving. I might be completely lost, but really grateful for your thoughts on this. Okay, cool. Yeah, we can use Third Eye Blind as an example. That's all a Telefunken 251 on the vocals, a Neve preamp, a 1081 preamp, and an 1176 compressor, a Blackface original 1176 compressor. Lead vocals for me have not been extraordinarily complicated. I tend to prefer taking out the frequencies that are competing with other things rather than boosting high end. I feel like the lead vocals end up sounding more natural if I'm not trying to boost presence on them. And so, I'll end up pulling out the third sort of, first like high passing, sometimes a high pass really high, 150, 200 hertz, something like that, and then start pulling out some, like 300, 400, 500 stuff, start pulling that stuff out. I like subtractive EQ more on lead vocals because it just sounds more natural. And then, cutting through the band part of it, that's more about the compression. And my magic bullet has just always been the 1176. And so if there's ever a point where it's just not, the vocal is not owning its place in front of a bunch of roaring guitars, just put it through another 1176 and just slam it through there and it will fight its way through. I usually then have to do a little bit of de-essing. I like to de-ess after the compressor. I find that, if I de-ess before the compressor, the compressor just undoes my de-essing and I have to de-ess harder. And so that's usually what it is, just some subtractive EQ. I rarely ever boost highs on vocals unless I'm using a ribbon mic. If it's a ribbon mic, then I would actually boost stuff. But something like a 251, don't need to boost highs on that mic. And then and use an 1176 to get it to cut through. That has always been the magic bullet for me. So yeah, I think if you have those elements available, that's a great place to start. Okay, my computer's about to die. Excuse me 1 second. I'm gonna plug this thing in here. Okay, so this is Mixbus. A bunch of folks asked about this. I've talked about this thing about compressing the music bus separate. And so one person asks, what reviews? Vocal bus independently. You don't tend to compress across the final two bus. And so yeah, they're just asking for confirmation on that. As well, okay. Your general approach, okay. Then there's another one. Go having separate music vocal bus. Do some together in the box. Okay. Your passive summing mixer. Okay, yeah, this is another. That's a different thing. We'll get to that in a second. Okay, so yeah, the vocal, the music bus, vocal bus thing. So the issue with this for me was at a certain point that I would, start a mix, getting the music together, and get the music sounding great, get some overall compression on the music, and like, okay, this feels great, and then I would add the vocals in, and if this is a project where the vocals want to be more upfront, the vocals would eat up all of that dynamic pumping that was happening with the music that had become kind of an important part of the sound of the music at that point. And so I just got tired of having that happen, of like, okay, now, the music isn't really compressing the way I wanted. It was an important part of the sound. Now they have the vocals in there. The music feels totally different. And so I just decided I'm just going to separate these. So that doesn't happen anymore. And so what ended up happening, I started approaching it that way. And so what it is, literally all of the music, everything, drums, bass, guitars, keyboards, sound effects, any of their reverbs, delays, everything goes to a music bus. And then I'll put compression on that music bus. Sometimes it's the Unfairchild or these old Altec compressors or an API 2500 or I have an Allen Smart C2. And so that all gets compressed together. Sometimes I'll do a little bit of EQ on the whole thing. I think you may have seen recently I used this this UAD Pultec emulation on there. It was a really cool way of reshaping the low end. So I'll do that. So that's a finished thing. Music, all the vocals, so all the lead vocals, harmony vocals, background vocals, gang vocals, all their effects, delays, reverbs, whatever is on them, all go to a separate bus called vocals. And sometimes I'll compress them, but it's more common that I don't. And I'll do the compression individually in the vocals. And so those pop up on their own bus. Usually the vocal bus does not have a lot of individual, does not have processing on it. That's more done on the individual tracks. And so it's pretty rare for me to do an overall EQ move on the vocal bus or overall compression on the vocal bus. It's usually just nothing on there. So then those two buses blend together and they go to a final mix bus. And that final mix bus usually has my mastering chain on it. And so I've found now that the mastering has such a dramatic effect on the dynamics of the mix that I have to be listening to that while I'm mixing, or there's no chance of my mix sounding the way I want it to after it's been mastered. The dynamics would just get changed way too much. And so I mix anticipating how much dynamics are going to be lost in the mastering process. Whether I do it or somebody else does it, usually the results are going to be pretty much the same. You're going to have to give up some dynamics when you add that much loudness, and whether you're doing it with a digital limiter or by clipping or whatever, you're just going to lose dynamics. And so my mixes will take to the mastering better, whether I'm doing it or somebody else is doing it, if I monitor that. And so that is actually managing some dynamics there. And so the music and the vocals get summed together, and I like FabFilter Pro L2, and so that'll be on there doing its thing, and you can definitely see it triggering when the vocals come in and stuff like that. And so the whole thing is, in a sense, being compressed together, but it's more of a peak limiter at that point. But I typically never introduce compression at that point in the process, because I don't like how the compressor reacts when it's trying to manage both the band and the vocals at the same time. So that's the reasoning for it, and that's usually how it goes. Whether I'm summing in the computer or I'm using an external summing, my passive summing mixer, or even on an undertone console, it's the same routing architecture in any of those three cases. So the passive summing mixer, I have inputs for individual instruments; those get summed together as a music thing, and then I have individual inputs for vocals and background vocals; those get summed together as vocals. Those two stereo signals get summed together and get fed back into the computer, and I apply my mastering stuff while I'm mixing. So I have a track that's basically on input that has mastering stuff monitoring on it, even when I'm using my passive summing mixer. So there you go. That's the how it's set up and the reasoning behind it. Okay, so that covers these two, and then okay, so let's see. Let's go here, and I think I am just about out of time here, so we'll try and just squeeze in a couple more. Let's see, your passive summing mixer, could it be that the difference is the signal is going through the mic preamps before the compressors? Do you try doing the in-the-box mix but sending the signal to the mic preamps? Other people had suggested that, and it's a good suggestion, that maybe it really is just the coloration of the transformers and the circuitry of the mic preamps, and that if I did hardware inserts of those mic preamps and summed them in the computer, it might end up the same. It's a really, really good point, and I haven't done that experiment yet, but that could be a really great solution, where I wouldn't have to come out of the computer, which, you know, inevitably will always make things a little more complicated. And so it's a good thought. Okay. Okay, here's another one. We got, how do you keep phase locked and aligned on your multi-amps setup when you're recording guitars? Okay, and then there's this thing about mix bus stuff that was sort of related, we were just talking about. With the guitars, there's a couple things. I mean, when I have multiple microphones, multiple close mics on an amp, I am careful to try and match up the distances of them. So I'll make sure that they're all, you know, the same distance, because they're all serving a similar purpose, and I'm just kind of blending the character of the different mics. So I'll make sure that they're in the same position. And then if I have a mic I'm trying to blend that's further away, I'll either play with that distance until the phasing actually sounds musical to me. That was one place where I used the mic robot a lot. Or, you know, I would just go out and just keep moving it somewhat randomly until I find a spot where, okay, this sounds cool to me. So that was a possibility. And if none of those things got me where I wanted to be, I still have the option now in the computer with Pro Tools. I can slide things around by an individual sample, and in most cases, that's plenty of resolution to be able to phase align the frequency ranges that you're dealing with for a guitar or just about anything. Maybe the only thing that would be a problem would be cymbals, but but yeah, so I'll just move things around by, you know, little bits of samples until it sounds like they come into focus. And so frequencies aren't being canceled, but all the frequencies are adding up together. And so you can do that after the fact. And I'll almost always inevitably check that. If I have multiple mics on a guitar amp, I'll play with that and make sure that everything is adding up. So it always is getting more forward sounding and sounding closer when I'm adding stuff, instead of sounding like frequencies are being canceled and it's getting further away. And then there's an additional question here about mix on the overall, EQ on the overall mix. Looking at your videos, yeah, I was mentioning that what I just talked about, the UAD Pultec EQ on the music bus. I've gotten great results with it, so I'm sticking with it. I'm guessing that if I actually owned two real, Pultec EQs, I don't. I only have one, so I can't even try the experiment. Maybe that would sound better using the real hardware. Those things do sound incredibly beautiful and wouldn't be particularly hard to recall. I would certainly give it a go if I had a pair of them. I just don't. The only EQs that I would really put on an overall music bus or undertone EQs, I certainly trust those to do it. And I have done that occasionally at times, but I tend to, I should say that I only started EQing the overall music bus more recently. And in the past, so for probably everything that I had done, Third Eye Blind, Smash Mouth, the Good Charlotte stuff, whatever, blah, 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 all that stuff through the 2000s, whatever. It's only not until the last maybe 5 or 6 years, I started doing that more. I really never actually considered EQing the entire music bus or the whole bus in general. I just felt like, why would I want to do that to everything? If the mix needs to be brighter, I'll just go and brighten things, where I already have EQs going. And so I just never really did that. And it's never really been a part of my, my approach. And I think there was a part of me that thought that I didn't actually do my job correctly if I'm having to EQ this entire thing with an equalizer. But I think later on I've realized that there are some results that you get EQing everything together that you can't get EQing things individually. That it creates a cohesion in the mix when it's applied to everything together. That's kind of cool. And so I've been getting into that more. I just, always thought it was sort of a backwards way to approach things. Why don't I just EQ everything right in the first place, So that's my thoughts on it. I've never really been that invested in doing it, and so I've never really invested in having a pair of, really nice hardware EQs for that specific task. So yeah, I think it could be very much worthwhile to have some really great hardware EQs to do it with. But for now, I'm going to stick with my UAD one. Okay, let's see what else we got here. Let's see. Okay, so this is Nick Demaria. I feel like you've talked about mixing all the music. Okay, yeah, so this is the same thing. Just talked about that. Okay, yeah, this is an interesting one. Okay, I was wondering if you could share a bit of light on how you get enough level from low output microphones such as the 633A. Yeah, definitely not a lot of level coming off that thing. Are you just boosting on the console, or are you using outboard gear in a home studio environment without a console? I'm looking for some advice on whether products like Cloud Lifter, I actually don't know what that is, I've never used that, are the best solution going forward. Thanks again. Well, for me, I think it's definitely important to choose the right mic for the right application. I typically use those 633As on stuff that are super loud because they can take it beautifully. They have titanium diaphragms, or at least I was told they do. I actually don't know if that's true or not. But man, they'll take, you can throw anything at those mics and they'll totally take it. So they're great, as close mics on drums or up close on amps. I've put them on Leslie speakers on the horns, which is insanely loud. They sound beautiful on a Leslie. So I think, choosing the right mic for the right application is the best place to start. So I would never use, the 633A as a room mic when somebody's finger picking an acoustic guitar. I'll never get enough level out of that microphone without it being buried in hiss. And so I'm going to use a microphone that has some active circuitry in it, either a phantom powered mic or a tube mic with a power supply. That's going to give me a lot more level to work with at the source. If I'm working with a really low sound level to begin with, because there's no mic preamp in the world. There are certain limitations. Even the cleanest of mic preamps, you're gonna run into hiss problems at a certain point if you're really just asking too much from it. Boosting a microphone that's just not up to the task and is just not putting out enough level. So I would recommend using the right mic for the right application. But the Undertone preamps are really wonderful. They're Class A mic preamps and they're astonishingly quiet. And there's a really interesting sort of anomaly for any of you that might have an MPEQ1, because that's a combination of the mic preamp circuitry and the equalizer circuitry, which has a line amp at the beginning of it. There's a weird thing about the line amp, and Larry Jasper would have to explain why this is, but the line amp on the equalizer part of the circuit, you can add 10 dB of gain at that stage, and it actually gets quieter there's less noise when you turn that gain up, and I don't know why that is. He explained it to me once, but I forgot. And so that's always a cool trick that I have. Like if I've maxed out on my mic preamp, sometimes I'll actually back it off 10 dB and turn it up with the line amp, because I know the line amp will not add any more noise. So that's, one of the ways that I get a lot of gain. If even when I have like a U67 or something that has a ton of output, a really high output microphone, and I still need a lot of gain because somebody's just playing super quiet. I can get 70 dB of gain between the mic preamp and that line stage with the undertone pre, or an MPQ1. Okay, cool. So we got Dave Longan is asking, have you ever utilized impulse responses for reverbs? I find the ways you use room mics to be really interesting, and it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on using IRs for similar purposes. I use reverb plugins that use IRs. I really like the one Space. There's a couple of patches in there from Spring Reverbs that I really, really enjoy. I use a lot. I do have Altiverb, and so I use that on some stuff. I've never gone through the process of creating my own IRs, and I'm going to do that at some point. That actually really interests me, and I do want to capture some of the, like I do have a real plate reverb at Barefoot. I have a collection of really cool Spring Reverbs. I'd like to capture those as IRs, see how close I can get them. I would make use of those. Maybe at some point somebody can show me how to do that. I just haven't taken the time to figure it out. I have to say, impulse responses of rooms are only going to be as good as you get from putting a speaker in a room with a microphone, and that there is a cool effect for that, but it still doesn't sound anything like having the actual drums in the room with room mics. So I've never heard any impulse response that sounds like the drummer being in the room with room mics. It's just a fundamentally different thing, as far as I can tell. So I've never really treated it in that way of like, this is going to be a replacement for actual room mics. I mean, I guess I've tried to do that, but it never, I think it's sort of a, it's a Band-Aid fix for something that you'll never really quite get the same result. But I am going to look into that. Good question. Okay, so now we've got Take Flight Music Studio. What do you do to combat Fletcher-Munson curves? That is to say, the EQ balance of a mix appears to change based on the volume playback. Thank you so much. Yeah, this was cool because I didn't even know what the Fletcher-Munson curve was. That's what I love about people asking questions. Then I learned stuff too. So I looked it up, but you actually sort of explained it in the question. I'm certainly aware of the effect that when you have the volume down lower, things don't sound as bright or present as when you have it turned up loud. And I definitely I am aware of that and play with it while I'm mixing. There's usually a point early on in the process when I'm shaping the low end, particularly like the kick drum and the bass guitar. I'm getting that part of it together. I'll turn up the volume louder for a little bit during that process so I can actually feel the air moving in the room from my subs. It's just easier for me to really know when it's right or not with a little volume. And then once I get past that and I'm feeling very confident that the low end is right, I tend to keep the volume much, much lower. If I mix the whole time with the volume up, the mix will definitely end up too dull. It's been proven over and over and over again for me that I'll listen to it super loud and be like, oh, this is the most incredible thing, and then listen to it the next day or something at a low volume, compare it to some other things, and just be like, oh, good Lord, what did I do? There's this sounds like there's a pillow over the speaker. So yeah, it also depends on the project. I actually, in general, on the Death from Above record, I allowed myself to mix with a little more volume on that record because I actually wanted it to not be too bright. And so I'll use that, as sort of a gauge. If I want something to be really, really bright, I keep the volume down in the control room. And so, I can actually use it as a tool in that way. But that's a really, really good question. I'm not sure how much people are tuned into that, but it's super real, man. It has a huge effect. Okay, let's see here. So Creative Covers is asking, I feel like I'm tone deaf to mid-range. I find it hard to hear if it's there or not. Is this normal, or can I learn to listen for it more, or am I doomed? I don't think anybody's doomed. Mid-range is tough, and I really struggled with the high mid-range, sort of presence range, and more recently, actually, when I was looking up the Fletcher Munson thing, I've learned why this was so weird for me. That because of I think the diameter and shape of our ear canal, our ears are especially sensitive to the 2K to 5K range, because those are the frequencies that get resonated in our ear canal. And boy, have I been aware of that. Like, those frequencies just drive me nuts. They just like stab me in the ear. And so earlier on, when you listen to like the T-Ride album, I'm just pulling it out of everything. Everything has 2K, 3K, 4K just gouged out of it, because I just didn't want it to be harsh. And it wasn't until much, much later that I started to learn how to make use of that range of frequencies, and not have it be really abusive on my ears. Okay. Hi.
People.
Hi, Mama.
People are here.
Yay.
And I've got wine and a new suitcase.
Okay, perfect.
There you go. This is going to make it even better and more
Okay.
interesting.
Yep, it sure is.
We have a dinner reservation in 10 minutes, so.
Okay, that means we're going to be done.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Sorry, everybody.
Awesome.
Sorry.
But we still have a sleeping baby, though.
Oh, shit, really?
Yeah, he's still asleep.
Well, let's see how long that lasts after I came charging in here.
Okay,
with
yeah.
the China shop.
This is the old fuck you, I'm home.
Cheers, everybody.
All right.
He's going to keep
Cheers.
answering questions until the baby wakes up.
Okay, yeah, we'll see what happens. So like, the 2K to 5K thing was a huge problem for me. And ultimately, I felt like my mixes were lacking and a certain aggressive energy in them, and so I wanted to fix that. And it took experimentation for me to try and figure out how to get better at utilizing those frequencies. And the thing that I always recommend is use references. I've talked about it a bunch of times already, just in this series of questions. But if there's a mix that has mid-range in it that you really, really love, go. Pull it up and A/B it to what you're listening to. You can use a spectrum analyzer, see how it looks when you're looking at something that has the sound that you like and has the mid-range you like, and then pull up your mix and see what the difference is in the mid-range. That's really the best way to learn. It always has been for me. Just always compare to things that you love the sound of. There may be something going on with your speakers. I don't know what you're using to monitor, but I grew up learning on NS10s. The only thing that NS10s were good for was the mid-range. They have an actual peak at 1.5K, and they're incredibly focused in the mid-range, I think, in a very useful way. So it was the reason that people got so much good use out of them. So I know you will figure this out. All right, here we go. Joan Pyron is asking, how did you record the Fush You Mang distorted guitars? For me, one of the best guitar tones ever. Thanks so much. Yeah, that was a pretty specific thing. So we had on that record, it was kind of heavier guitars on that record. So there was a whole lot of using a Marshall that had typically a mic close up on it, probably just a 57. I mean, at that time I was using like a 57, a combination of a 57 and a Sennheiser 441, that kind of a thing. And so most all of the guitar sounds were a combination of that, like just a Marshall with a couple of close mics on it. And then I have this little Vox Cambridge amp. It's basically the American release version of a Vox AC-15. And I would take that amp and put it through a 412 cabinet and put a mic about 6 feet away, pointing right at the dead center of the four cabinets. And it gave this totally different, like really aggressive, mid-rangey, but kind of clearer, punchier, wiry sound that we would layer with the Marshall, which was more saturated. And I'm pretty sure the microphone was an 87. It was a U87 for that, for the Vox Cambridge sound. So most everything was a combination of those two things. There's a couple, for all the heavy guitar stuff, and I think that's specifically what you're asking about. Yeah, the distorted guitar. So it was a combination of those two things. Okay, so what is the most badass guitar tone on an album that you did not record? Did you attempt to reverse engineer it or try to approximate it with your own gear? If so, how? Okay. One of my favorite guitar sounds of all time is Led Zeppelin Heartbreaker. And I did try and reverse engineer it. It was in the midst of working on the second Slash record. And I'm just hopelessly experimental all the time. I'm hopelessly curious. And so I tried to do an experimental re-record of Heartbreaker. I had some extra time in the middle of that project and was like, fuck it, let's try it. Oh, I remember. I was auditioning some A to D converters at the time. And I needed some source material for it that I would record on both sets of converters. So I was like, man, fuck it, let's play a Led Zeppelin song. And everything was set up to record with Slash. And so I did do that. And I'm going to find that recording and I'll pull it up as a demonstration thing. It'd be fun to check out. And I think I got pretty amazingly close on the guitar sound. And the trick really was a whole lot of room mic. That guitar sound does not sound like a mic up close on an amp. I was using a Les Paul through a Vox AC-30, and I can't remember if there was another amp blended. There may have been. We'll find out for sure when I dig this thing up, and I'll do an episode on it. It'll be super fun. But yeah, love that guitar sound. I think I got close. You all can let me know when we check it out. But yeah, that was super, super fun. Okay, so we have one. You mentioned last week on the Quonset video, Queens of the Stone Age video, you were using room mics on the guitars. Any specific advice on placement of room mics for guitars? Just a couple feet, mic and Omni. Okay, there's a couple of ways that I approach room miking guitars. And so one is what I just mentioned. So like if it's going to be the main microphone and I'm not trying to blend it with close mics, then I'll put it out in front of the cabinet facing the cabinet so you actually get some direct sound, but it's further away. So that's one approach, and that's if I'm intending to really just use that mic. If I'm going to try and blend room mics with a close mic, then there's a couple of options there. Mainly what I would do is there's a close mic that's going to be sort of the main part of the sound. I just want the option of adding more room. I'll take a room mic and I face it away from the amp, so it's not getting any of the direct signal at all because it minimizes the phasing issues that you have when they get blended. So a mic in cardioid facing out into the room, you get all room sound. I can blend it in with close mic and not have phasing issues. The other possibility is when I'm trying to sort of manufacture a tweaky, weird, sort of phased EQ on the guitar, and so I'll put mics just up and around the amp in sort of random places that I can blend in with close mics, and just find one that creates a cool nasally quality that'll make it separated out from the rest of the music or other guitars that are going on. It's really good when you're doing a lead guitar sound and you've used a particular setup for the rhythm guitar. Add a room mic for when the lead guitar happens, and it'll just automatically create a totally different, sonic signature to the guitar when you create all this sort of phasing between the two microphones. So those will be either just like directly above the amp pointing down maybe 4 or 5 feet, or off to one side pointing at the amp, or behind the amp maybe 4 or 5 feet. But these are all kind of closer like within 6 feet, something like that. So those are kind of the 3 main ways that I approach miking the room. Okay, we're going to do one more and then we're done. Let's see what this is. Thanks so much for sharing. Okay, can you talk about recording the intros on the Good Charlotte records? Will you have a deconstruction for one of their records? I'm definitely going to do Good Charlotte stuff at some point, probably sometime soon. The first intro, and I'll focus more on that one because I think it's sort of the most interesting. The second one we ended up doing because we sort of felt obligated to. Man, I got a lot of light shining in my face. Holy mackerel, hold on. Let me try and tame that a little bit. Okay, this is this is going to totally change now. On the first one, I did this thing that I've talked about a lot of going and meeting with the band and just try to get a sense of what they're into. So I know what this band loves or hates or whatever, so I can actually confidently be a part of making decisions of what'll be cool for the band. And one of the things that really struck me, I went and hung out with them in, I think it was in Maryland. Yeah, this was when they were hanging out in Maryland. And we were just driving around in their car, me and I think 3 or 4 of the band members. And they had a CD player, a CD changer player in their car. And we were just listening to stuff that they were listening to at the time. And one of the things that came up in their CD changer was the soundtrack to Edward Scissorhands. And I was like, really? You guys just drive around in your car listening to Edward Scissorhands? And they're like, yeah, totally. We love this soundtrack. It's so amazing. And I thought, wow, that's so cool. This is a real influence for them. They're really into this. And so I thought we should incorporate that in the record. And so that was really the reason that intro happened, is that, that's something that's a totally organic part of their musical world. They listen to Danny Elfman soundtracks all the time. At least at that time they did. And so I ended up taking it upon myself to write and arrange that intro. And so the very beginning of it, the more sort of symphonic part of it, was something that I wrote and arranged. And I started off just programming everything in my computer with sample banks and stuff. And then ultimately we had David Campbell did strings on the whole record. And so he transcribed the string parts and had live string players play that intro, which I blended in with the programmed strings. And then the band wrote the second part of it, so it led into the real punk rock, super fast thing that happened after that. And then we sort of married them together and had the weird like choir sounds and the strings play on top of the band as well, to have it all sort of fuse together and actually really represent their thing. Because like they were listening to punk rock albums and Danny Elfman's soundtrack albums all at the same time, and so we just put it all together on their record. So that is how that happened, and I think that is as much time as we have. I've gotten through as many as I can in this round, but I'll do more, and I'll just keep slogging through these. So thank you again for all the incredible questions. I learned stuff going through this. I hope other people are gaining more insights into some of this stuff with all these really incredible questions. And we will definitely do more. All right, thanks for checking it out. Bye.
You put the who's in on the whatsy. Attach the whatsy to the whoosy. Connect the thingamajig to the thingamabob, and that'll make the whatchamacallit go. You hook the gidget to the gadget. Adjust the gadget to the gidget. Unhook the dingley-dang from the diddly-doo.